At first, she panicked, convinced a stranger was trying to rob her. In reality, it was a millionaire CEO who had accidentally climbed into her car, mistaking it for his ride. That unexpected mix-up became the start of an unusual love story. Before we dive in, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and at the end don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy! It happened on a Tuesday night, the kind of night when exhaustion mixes with arrogance and you believe the world revolves around you. My schedule was chaos, the partners had just dragged me through a brutal meeting, and I stormed out of the building convinced I had earned at least one thing in life, a quiet ride home. I spotted the black sedan waiting by the curb, same model, same tinted windows as the cars I usually booked. Without hesitation, I yanked the door open, slid into the back seat, and ordered in my usual tone of command, "Park Avenue, and make it quick." Silence. No engine starting. No respectful nod from a driver. Just silence. I looked up and met the startled eyes of a young woman gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her voice trembled between outrage and disbelief. "Excuse me, what exactly do you think you're doing in my car?" I blinked, completely thrown off. "Aren't you the driver?" She gasped, turned fully toward me, and her eyes flared with fire. "Driver? This is my car. My personal car. Do I look like a taxi service to you?" I should have apologized, should have jumped out immediately, but pride never let me take the easy way out. "In fairness, it's the same model as the one I ordered. And you're parked directly in front of the building. How was I supposed to know?" She leaned closer, her voice cutting like a blade. "Maybe by using your eyes, Mr. Suit. Or do millionaires no longer bother with details?" Her words stung, not because of the insult, but because of how easily she pegged me. I looked at her properly then. Dark hair pulled into a simple bun, sharp cheekbones, eyes that refused to lower before anyone. She wasn't intimidated, not by my tailored jacket, not by my name. That unsettled me. "You know," I said slowly, fighting the urge to smirk, "most people would be flattered a partner from Ashcroft and Gray mistook their car for a professional service." She laughed, not kindly, more like a dagger finding its target. "Most people? Or just the ones desperate to impress you?" The silence that followed was tense, but it wasn't empty. Something flickered there, a strange current I couldn't quite name. I finally opened the door, muttering, "Enjoy your evening, miss. Whoever you are." She didn't let me escape with dignity. "It's Sofia," she said firmly. "And next time you jump into a stranger's car, Alexander, try knocking first." I froze with one foot on the pavement. She knew my name. Of course she did. Everyone in that district knew the faces of the partners who ruled the firm. But the way she said it, without awe, without fear, left me more rattled than the entire meeting I had just left behind. I closed the door gently and stepped back into the night, but my thoughts stayed trapped in that car with her. I didn't know then that fate had a cruel sense of humor, and that this brief collision was just the first move in a game neither of us intended to play. Because less than 24 hours later, we would meet again, in a place where escape was impossible. I arrived at the office the next morning with my usual armor on, a pressed navy suit, cufflinks engraved with my initials, and the certainty that the building was mine to command. My name wasn't on the walls for decoration, it was etched into every deal, every courtroom triumph, every sleepless night spent pushing this firm to the top. Nothing in my life felt accidental, and yet fate has a way of mocking men like me. The partners were gathering in the corridor outside the conference rooms, exchanging their usual polished greetings. I loosened my tie slightly, already preparing my strategy for the day, when a burst of laughter echoed down the hall. I glanced up, and there she was, Sofia. The woman from the car. Except now she wasn't behind a steering wheel, she was carrying a stack of files nearly half her height, walking briskly between departments with a confidence that had no right to exist in someone dressed so modestly. For a second, I thought it must be a coincidence, some cruel trick. But then she looked up, met my eyes, and the corner of her mouth curved into the faintest smile. "You," I muttered under my breath. "Yes, me," she answered out loud, loud enough that half the corridor turned their heads. The audacity stunned me. Assistants weren't supposed to speak to partners that way, not in this building, not in front of witnesses. And yet she did, as if hierarchy was nothing but furniture she could move aside whenever it annoyed her. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. "What exactly are you doing here?" She raised an eyebrow, shifting the stack of files to one arm with ease. "Working. Unlike some people who confuse cars with taxis, I actually show up to my job." A few associates snickered behind us. I caught the sound, sharp and humiliating. My reputation had been carved out of steel, but even steel cracks under ridicule. I leaned in closer, keeping my smile fixed. "Careful, Sofia. In this firm, words travel faster than resumes." Her eyes didn't waver. "Then I suppose you'll hear about me very soon." She turned and walked away, leaving the corridor buzzing with whispers, my colleagues exchanging curious looks as if they'd just witnessed a duel. Inside the conference room, I tried to focus on the contract negotiations ahead, but my thoughts betrayed me. Every time she moved past the glass walls carrying documents, every time her laughter filtered in from the hall, it gnawed at me. There was something dangerous about her presence, not because she threatened my position, but because she didn't seem to care about it at all. And people who aren't afraid of power are the ones most capable of shaking it. When the meeting finally adjourned, one of my colleagues, Richard, clapped me on the shoulder. "Interesting assistant, that one," he said casually. "Sharp tongue. Not easily impressed." I forced a chuckle. "We'll see how long that lasts." But inside, I knew something had already shifted. I wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in public, and certainly not by someone with no rank, no wealth, no armor. Yet Sofia had drawn first blood in front of half the firm, and instead of anger, I felt something far more dangerous, anticipation. Because if this was how she began our acquaintance, I couldn't imagine what the next move would look like. The next days passed in a blur of meetings, depositions, and endless phone calls, yet no matter how crowded my calendar grew, Sofia's presence lingered like an echo I could not silence. I saw her in the elevator carrying files for Oliver, her immediate boss, answering his questions with calm precision. I overheard her on the phone with a client, her voice smooth but firm, refusing to let herself be talked down to. Every moment she moved through the office she reminded me that she wasn't just another anonymous assistant fading into the background. She had a way of drawing attention without ever asking for it, and though I despised admitting it, I caught myself watching her more than I should have. It happened one afternoon during a delicate negotiation with a new client. I had spent weeks cultivating the deal, polishing every argument until it gleamed like a diamond, certain that nothing could go wrong. The client was wealthy, traditional, and notoriously humorless. Still, I made the mistake of believing charm could carry the day. When he raised concerns about the financial terms, I leaned back and attempted a joke to ease the tension, something about lawyers billing more hours than surgeons and saving fewer lives. Silence. Not polite silence, not thoughtful silence, dead, suffocating silence. The client's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightened, and I knew instantly that I had struck the wrong note. Before I could recover, Sofia appeared at the edge of the room, delivering a folder for Oliver. She caught the moment, the shift in the client's expression, the mistake I had made. Without hesitation, she smiled warmly and said, "What Mr. Alexander means is that lawyers are surgeons of a different kind, we operate on problems instead of people, and our goal is to leave no scars." The client's face softened. He chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "That's a much better comparison." Just like that, the tension dissolved, the conversation resumed, and the deal remained alive. I sat there, outwardly composed, but inside I burned, not with anger at her intrusion, but with something more complicated. Relief, certainly. Curiosity, absolutely. And a growing recognition that this assistant, this woman who had mocked me in a car and embarrassed me in a corridor, had just salvaged a negotiation I might have ruined. After the meeting, I cornered her in the hallway. "Enjoy saving me in there?" I asked, my voice dripping with irony. She met my gaze calmly. "Enjoy nearly losing a client with one bad joke?" I exhaled sharply, almost laughing despite myself. "You realize you just undercut a senior partner in front of one of the firm's most important accounts?" "No," she replied evenly. "I supported him. I supported the firm. There's a difference." The worst part was that she was right. I hated conceding, but the truth was inescapable. I stared at her for a moment longer, searching for arrogance in her eyes, but found only conviction. She didn't see me as untouchable, but neither did she see herself as insignificant. That combination unsettled me more than any courtroom battle. I turned away before I said something reckless, but the echo of her words followed me into the evening. For the first time in years, I found myself intrigued by someone not because of their position, their wealth, or their influence, but because of their defiance. Sofia had stepped into my world, uninvited, and without meaning to. She had forced me to see myself differently. As I left the office that night, the city lights glowing through the glass tower, I caught her reflection in the lobby mirror. She was laughing with Oliver, her loyalty clear, her presence steady. I clenched my jaw. Something told me this was no longer just chance encounters and amusing conflicts. This was the beginning of a rivalry, or something even more dangerous. I had built my career on control. Control of clients, control of the courtroom, control of my own image. Yet somehow Sofia had managed to wedge herself into the cracks of that armor, and every day that passed I felt myself losing ground. The office began to whisper about her after she salvaged that negotiation. People who had never noticed her before suddenly praised her quick thinking, her composure, her ability to speak where others hesitated. I should have ignored it, buried myself in work, but instead I found myself watching her more carefully, analyzing her movements the way I would study an opponent across the table. It wasn't long before I decided to act. Assistants with that kind of intelligence were rare, and loyalty could always be bought. One evening, I asked Oliver to send her into my office. She stepped in, notebook in hand, her expression wary, as if she already anticipated some hidden trap. I gestured to the leather chair across from my desk. "Sit," I said, perhaps more curtly than intended. She didn't move at once. "Do I need representation for this meeting?" The corner of my mouth twitched despite myself. "Only if you plan to sue me. I asked you here to make an offer." Her eyebrows arched slightly, but she sat down, placing the notebook on her lap. I leaned forward, folding my hands. "You've shown initiative. You've shown intelligence. And unlike most of the assistants in this building, you don't waste time trying to flatter your superiors. I respect that. Which is why I want you on my team. Leave Oliver. Work for me. I'll double your salary and fast-track you toward positions that actually matter." Her eyes did not flicker with excitement. No trace of the gratitude I had expected. She simply studied me, calm and steady, until the silence grew sharp. Finally, she said, "I'm flattered, but no." I blinked. "No." She nodded once, her voice clear. "Oliver believed in me when no one else did. He gave me responsibility when others saw only another assistant. I won't abandon that loyalty for a paycheck, no matter how large." I leaned back slowly, my jaw tightening. "You think loyalty outweighs opportunity? Do you have any idea how rare an offer like this is?" "Maybe," she replied, rising from the chair, "but some of us value more than money. And if you really respected me, you'd know I couldn't be bought." Her words struck like a verdict. She turned and walked toward the door, leaving me in a silence I had never experienced in my own office. I should have been furious, and part of me was, but beneath the anger simmered something far more dangerous, admiration. By the end of the week, Oliver knew. Of course he knew. Loyalty like hers doesn't stay hidden, and when he discovered I had tried to lure her away, the atmosphere shifted. For the first time in years, Oliver and I stood on opposite sides of an invisible battlefield. His glances in meetings grew sharper, his tone colder, and though we exchanged polite words for the sake of appearances, everyone could sense the undercurrent of hostility. I had always known rivalry in courtrooms and boardrooms, but never inside the walls of my own firm. Now I had one, and it wasn't just Oliver. Sofia had become part of it, whether she realized or not. She had chosen her side, and her refusal had lit a fire I couldn't extinguish. One evening, as I left the office, I caught sight of them together, Oliver leaning close as she explained something from her notes, her eyes bright with determination. For a moment, I stood in the shadows, watching. The realization struck hard, she had become the piece both of us wanted on our side, not for the work she did, but for what she represented. And I knew then that this was no longer about business. Because rivalry has a way of transforming into obsession. And mine had just begun. The case that nearly split the firm in two began like so many others, quietly, with numbers on a page and a client certain of victory. It was a breach of contract dispute with damages high enough to make even senior partners nervous. Oliver took the lead, as expected, and I observed from the sidelines, watching the strategy unfold. At first, everything seemed in order, documents filed, witnesses prepped, a neat line of arguments polished for court. But law has a cruel way of punishing arrogance. Halfway through discovery, the defense produced evidence no one had anticipated, an obscure clause buried in a contract addendum that undermined nearly every argument Oliver's team had prepared. Overnight, our confident stance crumbled into panic. I will never forget the expression on Oliver's face when he realized the trap. In the war room, surrounded by restless associates, he slammed the contract on the table, cursing under his breath. "We're finished," he muttered, his voice tight with frustration. "They'll destroy us with this." I leaned back in my chair, almost enjoying the spectacle. "Perhaps you should have paid more attention," I said dryly. A few of the junior lawyers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the hostility simmering between us. And then, quietly, Sofia spoke. She had been sitting near the corner, stacks of files in front of her, taking notes as if the chaos didn't touch her. Without looking up, she said, "It's not over." Oliver snapped his head toward her. "What did you just say?" She lifted her gaze, calm and unflinching. "It's not over. That clause isn't as airtight as it looks. It references a regulation that was repealed 2 years ago. Which means, if we argue correctly, the entire provision collapses." The room went silent. One of the associates hurriedly opened a database, fingers flying across the keyboard. Within seconds, confirmation appeared on the screen, the regulation had indeed been struck down. The clause was invalid. I watched as Oliver's eyes widened, disbelief giving way to reluctant admiration. "How did you even notice that?" he asked. Sofia shrugged lightly. "Because I read the whole contract. Twice." The room erupted into murmurs, associates rushing to adjust briefs, strategies reformulated in real time. I sat there, stunned, torn between pride and resentment. She had just saved the firm millions, no, tens of millions, and in doing so, she had shifted the balance of power. After the hearing, when the judge ruled in our client's favor, the office celebrated. Partners toasted, clients congratulated, and Oliver basked in the glow of survival. But everyone knew the truth. It wasn't Oliver's brilliance that had saved the day. It was Sofia's eyes, Sofia's mind, Sofia's refusal to accept defeat. For the first time, the firm saw her not as an assistant carrying files but as a lawyer in waiting, a force no one could ignore. Later that evening, I found her alone in the corridor, organizing the chaos of papers left behind from the case. "You understand what you've done, don't you?" I asked, my voice low. She looked at me evenly. "I did my job." "No," I corrected sharply. "You did more than that. You changed how everyone sees you. And you changed how they see me. She tilted her head, curious. Is that a problem for you? I hesitated, then allowed a faint smile. It might be. But it's also fascinating. Her expression didn't change, but there was something in her eyes, calm, steady, defiant, that told me she knew exactly what line we were approaching, and that she had no intention of stepping back. As I walked away, applause still echoing from the partners' lounge, I realized the rivalry was no longer simply between Oliver and me. Sofia had become a power center of her own, and the firm was beginning to revolve around her. And soon enough, the person who noticed her most wouldn't be me or Oliver. It would be someone far higher, and that recognition would ignite a storm neither of us were ready for. The morning after Sofia's triumph, the atmosphere inside the firm was different. You could feel it in the way associates whispered her name in the elevator, in the subtle way partners glanced at her when she passed, as if they were seeing her for the first time. But what caught me most off guard was the way Helena West, our managing director, seemed to watch her. Helena had built her reputation on being ice incarnate, calm, commanding, untouchable. She never wasted words and never allowed emotion to blur her judgment. For her to notice someone, let alone an assistant, was nothing short of extraordinary. It was late in the afternoon when Helena summoned me to her office. The room was vast, the skyline glittering through floor-to-ceiling windows, and as always, she sat perfectly composed behind her desk. She gestured for me to sit but didn't speak at once. Instead, she tapped her pen against a closed folder in front of her. Finally, she said, "Tell me, Alexander. What do you make of Sofia?" I studied her carefully. Helena never asked idle questions. "She's smart," I said cautiously. "Sharper than most people give her credit for. And she knows how to stay calm when others panic." Helena's lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. "That's a polite description. She just saved us from losses that could have destroyed Oliver's department. And she did it without hesitation. Talent like that doesn't remain hidden for long." I leaned forward, uneasy. "Why do I feel you're leading me somewhere with this?" Helena opened the folder, revealing documents neatly clipped together. "Because I am. I've decided to offer her a position as my executive assistant. With the prospect of moving into a junior lawyer role once she finishes her degree." For a moment, I was silent. The word struck harder than I expected. "You're serious?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Completely." I forced a laugh, though it sounded brittle. "You realize Oliver will see this as a betrayal. And you realize I stopped, catching myself before admitting too much. Helena tilted her head, reading me with unnerving precision. "And you? What do you see it as?" I hesitated, choosing my words with care. "As a risk. She's untested. Ambition is dangerous in someone without boundaries." Helena folded her hands. "Ambition is exactly what this firm needs. Boundaries we can teach. Fire we cannot create." There was nothing more to say. The decision was made. Helena never entertained debates once she had chosen a course of action. I left her office with the unsettling realization that Sofia's life had just shifted, and by extension, so had mine. Later that evening, I passed by the corridor outside Helena's office just as Sofia stepped out. She looked startled to see me waiting there. "You heard?" she asked softly. I studied her expression, searching for arrogance, but found only determination. "I heard," I replied. And you've just made yourself the most wanted woman in this firm." She smiled faintly, though her eyes remained unreadable. "Then I'll have to prove I deserve it." I wanted to tell her that she already had. That her presence, her stubborn loyalty, her unwillingness to bend had done more than prove her worth. But I bit back the words, hiding them behind a smirk. "Just be careful, Sofia. When people start noticing you, they also start envying you." She tilted her head. Are you warning me, or yourself? I didn't answer. I simply stepped aside, letting her walk past, though my chest tightened as she did. Because I knew the battles ahead wouldn't just be Oliver against me, or even me against her. With Helena's backing, Sofia was no longer a piece on the board. She was becoming a player in her own right. And sooner or later, we would all have to face the consequences of that. When Helena's decision became official, the entire building buzzed like a hive struck with a stick. Some whispered admiration, others muttered resentment, but everyone understood that Sofia's rise was no longer a matter of speculation. She had been chosen, and that single act elevated her above every other assistant in the firm. I should have been indifferent. I had seen careers rise and fall more times than I could count. But this was different. I watched her with the unease of a man who felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, and I knew I could no longer stand by silently. It was late one evening when I found her in the library, the room deserted except for the hum of the city outside the tall windows. She was surrounded by open books, her notes scattered like fragments of an unfinished puzzle. For a moment, I simply observed her, the way her lips moved silently as she read, the crease of concentration between her brows. She didn't notice me until I spoke. "You're going to burn yourself out," I said softly. Her head snapped up, startled. I didn't realize anyone was still here. Neither did I. But apparently ambition doesn't sleep. She gave a small, tired smile. "When you've fought this hard to be noticed, you don't take it for granted." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "You're not just noticed anymore, Sofia. You're watched. And not just by Helena." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Is this another warning?" "No," I admitted. "It's something else. Something I probably shouldn't say." The silence between us stretched thin, and then I spoke before caution could silence me. "You intrigue me. More than I expected. More than I want to admit." She stared at me, her pen still between her fingers, her breath caught in her throat. "Alexander," she began, but her voice faltered. I forced a smile, trying to mask the weight of what I'd revealed. "Don't worry. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know that I see more than an assistant or a rising lawyer. I see you." Her eyes softened, and for a brief moment, I thought she might reach for me, might let her guard slip. But then she turned her gaze back to her notes, as if discipline alone could protect her. "I can't afford distractions," she whispered. I leaned closer, my voice low enough to tremble in the air between us. "Neither can I. But here we are." Before either of us could speak again, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hall. Oliver appeared in the doorway, his expression tense, his eyes flicking from her to me with sharp calculation. He stepped inside slowly, his voice too casual to be sincere. "Still working, Sofia? You should get some rest." She gathered her notes quickly, avoiding his gaze and mine. "I was just leaving." She brushed past us both, her perfume lingering like a ghost, leaving Oliver and me alone in a silence heavy with unspoken accusations. He looked at me, jaw tight. "Whatever game you're playing, Alexander, leave her out of it." I met his glare without flinching. "You assume too much. Maybe she's the one choosing her own path." Oliver stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. "She deserves better than to become a pawn in your ego wars." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, I realized something far more dangerous than rivalry was brewing. It wasn't just about positions or clients anymore. It was about Sofia herself, and the feelings neither of us could control. As I left the library that night, her words haunted me, "I can't afford distractions." Perhaps she was right. But distraction had already transformed into something deeper, and I knew that whatever came next, none of us would walk away unscathed. From the moment Helena's decision was announced, the office transformed into a theater of hidden tensions. People no longer whispered only about clients or deals, they whispered about Sofia. Some envied her rise, others admired it, but almost everyone had an opinion. And in every glance I caught from my colleagues, I could sense the unspoken question: which side would Alexander take? They had no idea that I had already chosen, long before I admitted it to myself. Oliver, of course, reacted as I expected. His pride could not stand the fact that the woman he had mentored now stood on a path that might eclipse his own. He became more protective, more watchful, and his every interaction with her carried a possessive undertone. I saw it in the way he lingered near her desk, in the way he intercepted conversations before I could approach, in the way his eyes hardened whenever mine met hers across the room. It was a silent war, fought not with documents or verdicts, but with stares and silences heavy enough to choke the air. One evening, as the corridors emptied and the glow of the city bled into the glass walls, I found myself alone with her again. She was gathering papers for Helena, her movements quick, her face drawn tight with exhaustion. I stepped into the room quietly. "You're working yourself to death," I said. She didn't turn, just kept stacking files. "It's called ambition. You should recognize it." "I do. I also recognize when ambition becomes a burden." Finally, she turned, her eyes sharp. "Is this another lecture from the man who thinks he can buy loyalty and shape destinies?" Her words cut, but I didn't flinch. "No. This isn't about loyalty. This is about you. About the fact that you're caught between two men who can't seem to stop competing, and one of them is me." She froze, the papers slipping slightly from her grip. For a moment, her defenses faltered. "Alexander, why are you saying this?" "Because it's the truth. You've become the center of this firm's attention, Sofia. And while others are jealous, Oliver and I hesitated, my voice lower now, we're fighting for something far more dangerous than professional pride." Her lips parted, as if she wanted to reply, but the sound of footsteps interrupted us. Oliver entered, his expression darkening the instant he saw us together. He closed the door behind him, his voice taut with accusation. "Am I interrupting something?" I straightened, meeting his glare head-on. "We were discussing work." His jaw clenched. "Is that what you call it?" He turned to Sofia, his tone softening. "You don't have to stay here, you know. You don't owe anyone explanations." She bristled, caught between us, her voice strained. "Enough. Both of you. I'm not a prize to be won." She gathered her files, brushed past us, and left the room without looking back. The silence that followed was thick with unspoken fury. Oliver stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You've taken everything from me before, Alexander. Clients. Recognition. And now you think you'll take her? I won't let you." I held his stare, my chest tight with the heat of rivalry. "This isn't about what you'll let me do, Oliver. It's about what she chooses." For a long moment, we stood there, two men bound by ambition, pride, and a woman who had become more than either of us expected. And in that silence, I understood that this was no longer just a clash of careers. It was personal, it was emotional, and it would only grow more dangerous. As I walked away that night, Sofia's words echoed in my mind, "I'm not a prize to be won." She was right. Yet the irony was cruel, because the more she resisted, the more she became the center of everything. And sooner than any of us imagined, she would be forced to make a choice that would turn all our lives upside down. The weeks that followed blurred into a storm of tension and unspoken words. Sofia no longer lingered in hallways where Oliver and I might confront her. She carried herself with even more determination, her schedule consumed by Helena's assignments, her evenings spent buried in casework for her law classes. Yet, despite her efforts to remain untouchable, her presence was everywhere. Every meeting, every memo, every client interaction seemed to carry her mark, as if she were no longer an assistant at all but a force guiding the firm from the shadows. One night, as the city pulsed with neon light outside the windows, I found her again in the library. She sat at the long oak table, surrounded by open casebooks, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. I stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping closer. "You never stop, do you?" I asked softly. She looked up, weariness in her eyes, but also something softer. "If I stop, I lose momentum. And I can't afford that." I pulled out a chair, sitting across from her. "You're not just fighting for your career, Sofia. You're fighting against all of us, against Oliver, against me, even against Helena's expectations. Doesn't it exhaust you?" Her lips curved faintly. "It terrifies me. But it also keeps me alive." I studied her carefully, the strength in her voice, the flicker of vulnerability she tried to hide. "Do you know what I see when I look at you now?" I asked. She shook her head. "I see someone who belongs at this table. Not as an assistant. Not as a shadow. But as an equal." Her breath caught, and for a moment the silence was heavier than any verdict I had ever heard in court. She opened her mouth, but before she could reply, the door swung open. Oliver stood there, his eyes narrowing as they fell on us. His voice was cold. "Helena's looking for you, Sofia." She rose quickly, gathering her notes, clearly desperate to avoid another confrontation. But Oliver stopped her with a hand on her arm. "Wait." His voice softened, almost breaking. "I need to say this." He turned to me briefly, then back to her. "Sofia, I've tried to hold it back, but I can't anymore. I care about you. More than I should. More than I ever expected." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Sofia froze, her expression unreadable, while my chest tightened with a surge of conflicting emotions. I rose slowly, unwilling to let the moment pass unanswered. "And what makes you think she doesn't already know that, Oliver?" My voice was calm, but it carried an edge sharp enough to cut. Sofia stepped back, her eyes wide, torn between us. "Stop it. Both of you. This isn't fair." Oliver turned on me, anger flaring. "You've always had everything, Alexander. Power, money, reputation. You don't get to take her too." I met his fury without flinching. "This isn't about what I take. It's about what she wants. And if you can't see that, then you've already lost." The silence that followed was suffocating. Sofia looked between us, her hands trembling slightly, before whispering, "I can't do this. Not like this." She pushed past Oliver and left the room, the echo of her footsteps lingering like a wound. Oliver glared at me, his voice low and ragged. "This isn't over." "No," I admitted quietly, "it's only just beginning." That night, lying awake in my penthouse, I replayed her expression again and again, the fear, the conflict, the weight of being caught between us. And for the first time in years, I felt something I could barely admit to myself: vulnerability. Because beneath all the rivalry, beneath all the ambition, I no longer wanted her as an assistant or as a victory. I wanted her because she was the only person who saw me without the armor, without the name. And I knew the time was coming when I would have to show her that side fully. Not the partner, not the millionaire, but the man who, against his will, had begun to fall. The night of Sofia's graduation arrived like a verdict I had been waiting for, though I never admitted it aloud. The ballroom was filled with the hum of celebration, the air heavy with the scent of roses and champagne. Rows of proud families clapped as names were called, voices rising to cheer each new graduate. I stood near the back, hands clasped behind my back, trying to appear like any other observer, though my chest burned with anticipation. When they called her name, the room seemed to pause. Sofia Morales. She walked across the stage in a simple black gown, her step steady, her chin lifted with quiet pride. No fanfare, no unnecessary theatrics, just presence. She accepted her certificate, shook hands with the dean, and in that instant the crowd erupted. But my eyes never left her face. She looked out across the hall, searching, and when her gaze finally met mine, a flicker passed between us. recognition, gratitude, and something deeper neither of us dared to name in front of hundreds of witnesses. The celebration continued late into the night, the firm having organized a private reception in her honor. Partners raised glasses, associates offered congratulations, and Helena herself delivered a speech that could have been mistaken for a coronation. "Today, we honor not only achievement, but resilience," Helena said, her voice ringing through the room. "Sofia represents what this firm should always stand for: courage, integrity, and the refusal to bow to circumstances." Applause thundered. I joined in, but my thoughts were elsewhere. Later, when the crowd thinned and the noise softened, I found her on the terrace overlooking the city. The skyline stretched endlessly, lights glittering like stars scattered across the earth. She leaned against the railing, her diploma tucked under one arm, her expression caught between joy and uncertainty. "You made it," I said quietly, stepping beside her. She smiled faintly. "Did I? Or is this just another beginning?" "Both," I replied. "But tonight, you're allowed to celebrate the victory before you fight the next war." Her laughter was soft, almost fragile. "You always talk about war, Alexander. Do you ever think about peace?" I hesitated, then admitted, "Only when I'm with you." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with everything we had never said. Finally, she turned to face me, her eyes searching mine. "Why me? Out of everyone you've known, everyone who's wanted your attention, why me?" I exhaled slowly. "Because you never wanted it. Because you see me without the titles, without the power. And because somewhere between our arguments and our battles, I realized I don't want to win against you. I want to stand with you." Her lips parted, her breath catching. For a heartbeat, I thought she might close the distance between us. But then she looked away, her gaze falling back to the city. "And Oliver?" she asked softly. The question cut deeper than I expected. "Oliver is my rival, my colleague, and perhaps, in another life, he could have been my friend. But this isn't about him. It never was." She nodded slowly, her hands tightening around the railing. "You make it sound so simple. But it isn't. Choosing between loyalty, ambition, and, whatever this is, it isn't simple." I wanted to tell her that I would wait. That I would fight if I had to. That her choice didn't scare me, even if the answer did. But the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I said only, "You don't have to decide tonight." She turned back to me then, her eyes shining with something I couldn't quite name. "Maybe not tonight. But soon." The city stretched before us, vast and unyielding, and for the first time in years, I felt that my future wasn't in the boardroom or the courtroom. It was here, on this terrace, in the silence between us. And as the night drew to a close, I realized this was not the end of our story. It was the beginning of something far more uncertain, far more dangerous, and far more real than anything I had ever known. Because power fades, victories blur, and fortunes change. But feelings, the kind I had begun to admit for Sofia, those leave scars that no negotiation can erase.